Pledge of Allegiance.
If you can all please rise.
Please place your right hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is that better? Yes. This is Jackie's microphone. She always amplifies all of our voices in Congress. Let us thank Howard and Tiffany, co-presidents of Lincoln High School. Madam President. Lincoln High, to distinguished principal for the hospitality extended here, the warm welcome to each and every one of you for joining us late this afternoon. I'm honored to be here with my distinguished colleagues whom we represent San Francisco in the Congress of the United States, Jackie Speier, Congresswoman Jackie Speier. With the Surgeon General, a newly established title to match her extraordinary talent, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. A leader in the field of mobilization outside to make a difference, and she has in establishing Moms Demand Action, Shannon Watts. We all agreed that our VIP of the evening was AJ. AJ is AJ Santiago. AJ is the heart of the matter for us this evening. We have a good deal of subjects to talk about. At the same time as we're meeting here in the month of August, members, when they left Congress to come at home for the month of August for our district work period, were determined to own August, to talk about what we had done in the first 200 days of the Congress in the majority, to talk about what we promised in the election was to be for the people, to lower health care costs by lowering the cost of prescription drugs and preserving the pre-existing medical condition benefit and other things like that, to grow the economy of our country by building the infrastructure in a green way, lower health costs, bigger paychecks, and cleaner government. We think we can interest the administration perhaps in lowering prescription drug costs. We hope that we can interest them in building the infrastructure of America. It's a harder sell to interest them in cleaner government, but we are determined to do so. And that was our first bill that we passed, H.R. 1. H.R. 1, cleaner government. To lower dark money in politics, to amplify the voices of small donors and grassroots people. And so in the course of these 200 days, we passed legislation to do just that, clean up government, A. B, we did the Equality Act to end discrimination against the LGBTQ community. For our women, we passed, and we'll talk about it some more, the Violence Against Women Act in a much improved way. And equal pay for equal work. We were very proud of that. The bigger paychecks for all workers, we passed the Minimum Wage Act of $15 an hour. Of course, San Francisco has led the way in that respect, but now we made it past the House of Representatives, $15 an hour. Over 30 million people in our country will get a raise. Over 23 million of them are women. And so we need to do that. Net neutrality was so important to them to keep the internet free and open. We passed the Net Neutrality Act, and we passed Climate Action Now legislation as well. But this goes on and on about so many different things. For our dreamers, we passed the Promise Act, we passed the Dream Act, as well as an act of protecting people with temporary protected status in our country. In California, in our city, we have thousands of people who fall into that category. In our state, hundreds of thousands of people. So that was very important to us. And we passed many bills to lower the cost of health care and that. But one of the bills that we passed that was preeminent for us was H.R. 8, and that's what we're largely here to talk about today. So named H.R. 8 because when it was introduced, it was exactly 8 years since the assault on Gabby Giffords at her neighborhood meeting and with the loss of life. We introduced it in January, we passed it in February, sent it over to the Senate, along with a companion bill, H.R. 1112, which also addressed comprehensive background checks, common sense background checks, gun violence prevention. We have said we are not taking no for an answer. We are not taking no for an answer. So, even in fact, the chair of our Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, Mike Thompson, isn't with us because he's having his own town meeting in his district in Northern California, as are many of our members this month, even today, and beyond, before we go back into session. On the Senate side, the Senate leader says, I'm the Grim Reaper. That's what he calls himself, the Grim Reaper. Really? Is that the best thing you could say about yourself? You're the Grim Reaper. Well, we have news for you. You may think you're burying these bills, but they are alive and well in the public. Alive and well in the public. And we have no intention of taking no for an answer. Now, since we're at Abraham Lincoln High School, Madam President, Madam's Principal, Principal Felici. Well, since we're here, I'll just quote somebody I quote almost every day, and Jackie can attest to that, President Lincoln. President Lincoln said this, public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish almost anything. Without it, practically nothing. And we believe, Grim Reaper, that public sentiment will win the day because the 90% of the public support gun violence protection. Overwhelmingly, the public supports almost everything that I just named. So public sentiment is with us. And I want to thank so many of you who participated as we protected the Affordable Care Act from their assault. 10,000 meetings across the country from little lobbyists, little children with pre-existing conditions, disability groups, all across the country. People with over 125 million families are affected by a pre-existing condition. All different cancer, heart disease, everything you can imagine. Everybody joined in to help 10,000 events. So know your power, know the power of your voice. Of course, you know the power in San Francisco of your vote. So here we are, committed to public sentiment. Now, when Grim Reaper said that he was not going to, we're going to pass the gun bill, I said, well, we're going to make it just too hot for him to handle. But Sharon Watts did me one better. She said, if they don't pass it, they're going to have hell to pay. So whatever it is, we've got to turn up the heat. And turn up the heat is something that the person I'm introduced right now does so very, very well. Congresswoman Jackie Speier came to the Congress, an experienced legislator, experienced state senator from California, as you know her record, many of you. I want her to tell you personally, though, her story and how it relates to what is happening in Washington right now. She and I agree and say to our colleagues all the time, because our Democrats are, I think it's 99 to 100% all good on gun violence protection. But some on the other side of the aisle are not, and we say to them, your political survival is totally unimportant compared to the survival of our children who are here. Because of your power in gun violence. Well, an honor to be here. Thank you, Jackie, for joining us. Congresswoman Jackie Speier on the Armed Services Committee, protect and defend our country. On the Intelligence Committee, a strong voice, a strong woman's voice. Security, intelligence, on the Government Reform Committee, which has jurisdiction over everything in the government. Really a highly respected leader in the Congress of the United States, Congresswoman Jackie.
Madam Speaker, thank you for creating this opportunity for us to come together to talk about, I think, the seminal issue of the 2020 election. Let me first start off by reminding us all of the story of Dr. Benjamin Franklin, who, coming out of the Constitutional Convention after they had signed on the dotted line, he was approached by someone outside and said, Dr. Franklin, what kind of government did you give us? And he turned to that individual and said, a republic if you can keep it. And you are in the midst of the one person in this country right now who has the power to keep the republic, and that is Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Because she's the local representative, I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that she is the one powerful voice in the entire country to stand up to the administration that is wreaking havoc in the United States of America. So applaud her, please. So, why is this issue the seminal issue of the 2020 election? Because Moms Demand Action is now the largest advocacy organization on guns in the country, beating out the National Rifle Association. We can do this. We must do this. The bill, H.R. 8, that the Speaker spoke about, is universal background checks. It should be a no-brainer. We already have that law on the books. This just closes loopholes because when the law was originally passed in 1993, the internet wasn't around. Gun shows weren't commonplace. So this should be an easy lift for every member of the Congress of the United States. And we're going to make it an easy lift for them because we are going to march on the Capitol in the United States to prove to the Senate that if they don't take action on this, they're going to lose their elections. And that's the way we should be looking at it. You know that 91% of the children under the age of 15 who are killed by guns live in the United States. That you are 21 times more likely to be killed by a gun as a woman in the United States than any other high-income country in the world. That we had almost 40,000 deaths due to gun violence last year. And we have more guns in the possession of people in the United States than we have population. some 370 million guns. So, my story is very personal. I was shot 5 times in Jonestown, Guyana back in 1978. I went through the personal horror of lying on an airstrip for 22 hours expecting to die. And then when I did survive, I went through 2 months of major surgeries, one after the other. And I carry those scars with me every day. They're scars that I look at, but now I embrace, because we need to recognize that our job is not done in this country until we make it a safer place for everyone, but particularly our children. When we are manufacturing backpacks that are, in effect, the vests that people wear to protect themselves from bullets. I mean, bulletproof backpacks are being manufactured now in this country. Children don't do fire drills anymore. They do active shooter drills. I did a town hall earlier this year with 2 of the Parkland students and one of the survivors from Columbine. And one of the students in the audience stood up and said something that I will keep with me the rest of my life. She said, I dream a nightmare every night until my alarm goes off in the morning. Her fear of gun violence. So it is so important that you are all here. It is so important that we have strong voices on this issue, and I just thank the speaker for giving us this opportunity today.
Congressman Spear has been a leader on protecting women, whether it's violence against women in the military, sexual harassment, or whatever it is, whether it's promoting the Violence Against Women Act in a way that says boyfriends shouldn't have guns if they have stalked their former girlfriend and that. And so many technical ways in legislation, she has been a visible physical presence in all of that. Thank you, Jackie, for that, and so much more. We'll be hearing more from Jackie in the course of it. I said earlier that AJ was our VIP today. Right now, as we sit here, we're looking at sort of a Valentine cheer there for Davon Hahn. AJ's going to tell his story. Thank you, dear.
I forgot there was a mic there for a minute. I didn't even see that right there for a second. But by raise of hands, who knew Davon Hahn or heard his name recently? Higher, I want to see them. A lot of people have not really heard my name. I'm AJ Santiago, and Davon Hahn was one of my best friends. He was like a brother to me, a taller little brother. If you knew Davon, he was probably about like 6 feet tall. I was there that night. I got the call while I was laying in bed, trying to go to sleep. It was 12:30 in the morning on July 8th, and his brother called me and said, "Yo, I can't find my brother." And you don't know how hard it was to not hold back tears when I heard that one of our brothers was missing. Because if you know Day Day, then you know Avi, and they came as a care package. So him not being with his brother is really hard. So I immediately got up and threw on the first things I saw, which was like shorts and slides and a hoodie. Didn't even have on a shirt or anything. We got up and we ran down 3 hills straight to his house, because I live in Potrero Hill and he lived in on Army, I don't know if you guys know where that is, but it's in the Mission. And I'm sorry, I'm nervous. So it was about 1:15 now, and I got there, and his brother was there before me, and his brother was there before him, and I was like, something's not right, and I said, where's your brother? Like, isn't he supposed to be here right now? And they all said, like, we can't find him, we don't know where he is. So we sat in the house until like 3 in the morning, and I had to go because I had work the next morning. So we left at around 3:04, and I got home, and I got about an hour, maybe a half an hour of sleep, until I got the call again at 8:30. I'm not going to time, okay? I got the call again, and they said, he's gone. They confirmed that it's his body. And I hung up, and I connected to my speaker, and I put on his songs. Who knew that Davon was a rapper? Not very many, okay. Yeah, Davon Hahn was a rapper, and he made an incredible song, and I hope you guys get the chance to listen to them. But he was the light of a community. Who has heard of United Players? How about Uncle Rudy Corpus? He's the one who got me on this stage today to speak, and I truly appreciate him for having me speak. But he started United Players, and United Players is a violence prevention program, and it kept kids out of the streets, and it still does. But for some reason, Davon didn't make it, and it's pretty heartbreaking because it broke a whole community. And we had a candlestick lighting, and two of our youth, two little elementary schoolers, claimed that on the day of the candlestick lighting, they saw him. They saw him. They walked by and caught a glimpse of him. And to this very day, I can still hear his voice in the back of my head. Losing your best friend is something that's really hard. And I hope that nobody else would have to ever go through that. Because, I mean, look how many people there are here. I spoke at the Moms Demand Action rally not too long ago, and I saw a sign that said, bullets are not school supplies. And it's true. Bullets should never have to go through someone. Bullets should never have to be in a school area where it's a safe space, where kids can feel like they can run around and do whatever they please. They should just feel safe in school. No one should ever have to feel the pain that Davon's friends and family feel. Because I'm sitting up here now trying to hold back tears, but in reality, it's like, wow, he's really gone? He's not here anymore? I'm not gonna see his face anymore? Not gonna be able to hug him? I don't know if you guys remember, but at the rally I said Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through he who gives me strength. And I do everything that I do now for Davon. I go to school, I'm a senior at Burton. And I'm gonna cross the stage for him. He was gonna be a sophomore this year. He didn't get through half of high school. He didn't get to go to prom. Nobody said, I love you one last time to him. And it's all because of one bullet that went straight through his heart. We can do so much to stop this, and I know we can do it by the grace of God. I know we can do it because there are so many faces here that care about their kids. And I appreciate all of you for being here and listening to me speak and mumble and not know what I want to say. And cry. So when you see me again, just remember that I'm doing this for Davon. I don't do it for myself anymore. I do it for Davon Klein. Thank you.
That you both in Solid Burton High School. Devon went to Lincoln, and there are lots of Lincoln folks here today. Thank you for your presence on behalf of Devon as well. Can we hear from our Lincoln family? I think that while David may not physically be with us, in the spirit that you spelled out, he certainly in spirit is with us. And it is something so important that survivors of gun violence, the parents or siblings or friends have said. When this happens to you, you have a pre-existing medical condition, you have PTSD, you have something because it just has such an impact. And we're very blessed to have with us this evening, in addition to our VIP, to have the Surgeon General of California, as I said, a new position so important to capture the great talent and skill and the dedication of Dr. Burke Harris. Dr. Harris, will you talk to us about the trauma and the rest that children are affected by gun violence in the school, in the neighborhoods, in the families, or whatever else you to tell us about? It's kind of emotional after hearing AJ speak. Dr. Nadine Burke Harris.
Thank you so much, Speaker Pelosi, for bringing us together for this important conversation. And I want to thank you, AJ, for sharing your experience and for honoring Davon's memory. I'll share a little bit of my background for myself as a pediatrician who practiced in Bayview Hunters Point for almost 15 years. HB. That's how we got to know each other. You know, I have had the opportunity to experience through, unfortunately, far too many young people and families in our communities that are impacted by gun violence. And by the number of hands that went up in this audience, what we understand is that when someone you love is injured or killed in such a tragic, sudden, violent way, that it's not only a terrible tragedy for the individual, but it's traumatic for every single person that touches. And that trauma gets under our skin, and it changes our biology, right? It impacts the way, for children, their brains develop. It impacts the way that our immune system works, our hormonal system works, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed, right? That activation of our fight or flight response, that normal, natural response that's supposed to save our lives from a mortal threat. But when we experience things like what you had to experience, AJ, and I noticed that when you talked about it, right, you remember the details. You remember that it was 3:04. You remember what the text message said and how that conversation went. And that's because all those stress hormones that were pumping in your body, right, changes the way that our brains are functioning in that moment. And for every single hand that went up, we recognize that the impact of violence, and particularly gun violence, on our health and well-being these aren't just isolated incidents, these are a public health threat. Nearly half of California's violent deaths involve firearms. And in fact, our California Department of Public Health actually tracks this information and reported over 1,500 homicides and 1,600 suicides involved firearms in the year 2017 alone. 72% of the homicides in California involved guns. That's more than twice all of the other mechanisms of death combined. And I just want to put this into context, right? Here in California, there were more firearm-related deaths than opioid overdoses in 2017, right? And we hear all about the opioid epidemic, the opioid crisis. In fact, last year, Congress moved and enacted bipartisan legislation about the opioid crisis. Where is our bipartisan legislation about the public health crisis that is because gun violence is preventable. The big thing about that, the most important thing, right, is rejecting the myth that gun violence is just this thing that happens, right? And we don't have any control over it, and it only mentally ill people are the ones that commit gun violence, and all of these myths that people would have us believe to keep us from mobilizing for action. And what we understand is that here in California, we've passed some of the strongest gun violence protection laws in the United States, right? So we're implementing a lot of this preventive work that we hear about, but the key is recognizing that there's not one silver bullet. There's no one solution. Just like any other public health issue, we have to use multiple strategies all at once. We have to measure. We actually have to do research, right? Which the CDC has been prevented from doing, to understand which interventions are most effective at reducing the rates of gun violence. And then we also have to look at what does prevention really look like. When we think about strengthening supports so that everyone has equal economic opportunity, right? That is an important piece of protecting against violence. And here in California, we're really doing something really powerful that I'm incredibly excited about, and is one of the primary things that I am championing in my role as California's first Surgeon General. One of the things that we recognize as a risk factor, not only for perpetrating violence, but also being a victim of violence, is childhood trauma, right? The more trauma an individual has experienced in their childhood, the greater the likelihood that they will be either a perpetrator or a victim of violence. Now, on top On top of that, right, we recognize that childhood trauma is a risk factor for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States, for heart disease, for stroke, for Alzheimer's, for diabetes, right? That activation of our stress response and the way that it affects our health in the long term is a public health crisis. And here in California, in January of 2020, we will be rolling out universal screening for adverse childhood experiences in primary care. Our governor has and this is for once not an unfunded mandate, our governor has allocated over $40 million to reimburse providers to screen. And on top of that, committed an additional $60 million over the next 3 years to train our doctors and our primary care providers on trauma-informed care. California is leading the way in true prevention and early intervention. And this is all tied together so that we can change outcomes for the next generation.
Thank you, Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. She knows that what she speaks. She was such an outstanding star at Bayview Hunters Point when she was out there in the clinic, and she just did such beautiful. Any of you know of her work there. It was has been nationally recognized. And we're so glad that our Governor, Gavin Newsom, recognized that and that you were willing to take this position. And we're very proud of the governor, because even before he became governor, he had the initiative on the ballot that spoke to the need for gun violence prevention with the initiative that was passed. And people said to me, you're going too far, you're going too fast, you're doing too much. But he went all the way with it and continues to do so. Thank you so much for giving us the connection of it all. And the connection of it all is what do we do about it next? And we'll have some interaction about some of the initiatives in Congress, this or that. But again, Abraham Lincoln must have been thinking of Shannon Watts when he said public sentiment is everything. But for public sentiment to weigh in, the public has to know. They have to know. So we have to be able to get the word out. And nobody has done that better, stronger, and more concentrated, quick, expeditious way than Moms Demand Action and their great leader, Shannon Watts.
Thank you so much. And when we hear stories like Devon's, we feel that this isn't going fast enough, that 100 Americans are shot and killed in this country every single day. Whether that is city gun homicides, whether it's rural community suicides, whether it's unintentional shootings, a uniquely American phenomenon where children actually get guns and shoot themselves or other people. This is a crisis in our country. And yet we have some lawmakers, too many lawmakers, who think that it is acceptable to ask children like Devon to stand up to gunmen because they are too afraid to stand up to gun lobbyists. When the Sandy Hook school shooting tragedy happened in this country, that was when I got off the sidelines. And I saw pundits in the days and hours afterwards saying that if only the teachers had been armed, if only there had been more guns in that school, 20 children and 6 educators wouldn't have been slaughtered in the sanctity of an elementary school. Well, I'll tell you what, there are 400 million guns in this country, and if more guns and fewer gun laws made us safer, we would be the safest nation in the world. Instead, we have a 25 times higher gun homicide rate than any other high-income country. Now, all of this the stories that are so tragic, the fact that some of our lawmakers, too many of our lawmakers have been beholden to the gun lobby, I know that that can feel hopeless. It can even make you feel cynical. But it is so important to remember that that is dangerous because it keeps people from getting off the sidelines. And I am here tonight to tell you that we are winning. We are winning. I know we're all waiting for this cathartic moment in Congress when they will finally do the right thing. But remember that we have been working in state houses and in boardrooms across the country, and that we have passed stronger background check laws in 21 states, that we have passed red flag laws in 17 states, that we have disarmed domestic abusers in 28 states, that we have a 90% track record of killing bad NRA bills every single year. In the midterm elections, we outspent the NRA. We outmaneuvered the NRA. And yes, I am hopeful that the Senate will act. But as Speaker Pelosi said, if they think they can slow walk this issue, if they think that we will forget and that this energy will dissipate, they have another thing coming, and there will be hell to pay in the 2019 election. And we are, and we will, because that is what this badass army of women and mothers and others across the country have shown our lawmakers from state houses to the Capitol. That if you do the right thing, we will have your back. If you do the wrong thing, we will have your job. Sometimes literally, because Congresswoman Lucy McBath from Georgia is a former Moms Demand Action spokeswoman. There are many in the audience who have run and won and who will run again. This is going to take several election cycles. It is a marathon, not a sprint, but we are winning. And all we have to do is keep this momentum going, and it will point, eventually, the right president and the right Congress in the right direction. In the meantime, we have these amazing women like Congresswoman Spears and Speaker Pelosi who are fighting on this issue and making it a priority in their policy platforms. Guns was the third rail of American politics just a few years ago. Now we see all of the presidential candidates competing to see who can be the best. And that is in large part because Speaker Pelosi has made this one of the most important issues on her agenda. And so for that, I am turning it over. I'll say, and I want to do a quick call to action. If you are a Moms Demand Action or a Students Demand Action volunteer, please raise your hand. For those of you not raising your hand, please get your phones out. And I want you, and I don't care if you're a mom, you don't have to be. You can be a student, you can be a dad, it doesn't matter. Grandmother, aunt, uncle, don't make me name all the different members of our families. Text the word READY to 64433, and we will plug you in ways that you can get involved. We are meeting in district with all our senators across the country. We can ask you to make calls into states like Virginia and educate people there about who to vote for and when to vote. Every single seat in the Virginia Assembly is up for election this year in the NRA's backyard. There are so many things you can do, from meeting with state lawmakers to federal lawmakers to CEOs, educate people about responsible gun storage. All of it matters, but we only win this if the silent majority becomes a vocal majority. You have got to use your voices and your votes, and this is the way to do it. We need you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet, for all that you have said all that you have done for your great leadership. And when this is done, and I hope it will be very soon, will be in large measure because of your wonderful leadership in Moms Demand Action. I've never seen the outside groups on this subject, and you can attest to this, Shannon, you disagree or not, it is so in collaboration, right? Different groups are out there, every town, Moms Demand Action, Brady, Giffords, all different groups that have been working on these issues with a little bit of a different approach. Right now, all demanding action that they pass the background check legislation, and then go on from there. One of the most explosive situations that we have in our country is the combination of gun violence, white supremacy, and xenophobia that you see. When those things come together, it's a terrible situation. And so right now, I wanted to take some questions from the audience that we have. You gave us so many questions, and we're using the ones that had the most focus on them. And one of them was, Speaker Pelosi, would you commit to fund federal programs to combat white supremacy, which is the root of many of the mass shootings in the United States? Before I answer that question, I want to say the mass shootings are a horrible thing. They challenge our conscience, whether it's little children in Newtown, teenagers in Florida, people in the theater, in a nightclub, or a rock concert, whatever it is. It's horrible. It's horrible. But every single day, as Shannon meant, every single day on the streets of our cities and towns and in our communities, people are dying from gun violence, getting much less attention. I gave attention this evening, but much less attention than those high-profile events. And that's why we have to get to the heart of the matter. And the best way to do that is to have the background checks for everyone who has any form, guns, rifles, any kind of weapon, to have the background check. And as Jackie said, it is, we have the background checks. I whipped for that bill in the 90s when I was in the Congress. It was, we lost, we didn't always win. The first time we went out there to get the rule to take it up, we lost. I went up to Mr. Brady at the time. He and Sarah Brady and Jim Brady were sort of our inspirations, our spiritual leaders in all of this. But I had never met them. I was a new garden variety member of Congress, and I went up to Mr. Brady and I said, we had just lost, our whole group came over, we're freshmen and sophomore in West, we came over to fight to pass this bill and to pay our respects to you. Now, he had just been shot in the head, Ronald Reagan's press person, pay our respects to you. And he said, well, at least you accomplished one of those things. He was sharp as a tack, but in any event, it was hard, and then we passed it. But as Jackie said, in those days, there weren't internet sales. And then there was the resourcefulness of people saying, well, if you have to get a background check buying it in the store, we'll just have gun shows. Or we'll have somebody else go buy it for you, and then you buy it from them, the person-to-person sale. And those three things, gun shows, internet sales, and person-to-person, are what are in the expanded view of the bill. And then we have 1112, which says, if it is Mr. Clyburn's bill that just gives more time for the background check. So all of that saves more lives. We have other things we want to do. But if we could kick open that door and get that vote, give us a vote. Give us a vote. What are you afraid of? Success? That we will succeed? Are you afraid of that? So on this question of the connection between white supremacy, xenophobia, all of those horrible things that are happening in our country, and gun violence, and this question says, which are the roots of many of the mass shootings in the United States. Well, what's happening there is in the Department of Homeland Security an Office of Terrorism and Prevention of it. Unfortunately, budget for it went from $21 million to $2.6 million in this administration. And it has many major cuts in whether it's grants or personnel and the rest. So we really do, and Benny Thompson, who's the chair of Homeland Security, not the chair, it's nice to have the power, the majority, the chair of the committee is working very hard on that. But we do have to make sure people know, and that the people in charge of the administration know that we're aware of that. At the same time, as Dr. Burke-Harris mentioned, we now have research into gun violence, which they would not let the CDC even do research on gun violence, deaths from gun violence. And now in the majority, we are getting that. But we still have to fight this administration on the other score. But your question is right to the point of the connection of the hate talk and the gun violence that it evokes. I just say this, because Jackie mentioned Benjamin Franklin. At the beginning, well, in the darkest days of the Revolution, Thomas Paine said, "The times have found us." The times have found us. We think the times have found us now. They certainly have found AJ. They have found all of you. You came out this evening. They found the people on this stage and so many others to speak up and say no more of this. And while we don't place ourselves in the category of greatness of our founders, we do see the urgency to our country in ways beyond guns, but again, a part of it, whether it's a threat to our Constitution, a threat to who we are as basically a nation of immigrants, unless you're born and blessed to be a Native American, which is a blessing to you and to all of us. But to dishonor the Constitution, to denigrate the population and the newcomers to our country, to degrade the environment by resisting science and climate issues, and to undermine our values as a country in terms of how we invest in the future, and instead of heaping mountains of debt on our children, at times have found us. And I hope that you all feel that I don't know if our colleagues wanted to say anything. One of the questions is, do you think the single most effective action what do you think the single most effective action we can do to reduce gun violence? Shannon, would you speak to that?
Is this one working? Can you hear me? So there's a couple things. First of all, acting and showing up and going eyeball to eyeball with lawmakers. You know, when the Manchin-Toomey bill failed in 2013, that was the bill that would have closed the background check loophole back then. What lawmakers said, senators, even Democrats, was that they had heard more from the other side. So as activists, it's important that we are constantly reaching out to our lawmakers and tell them how we feel, even in the bluest of states. So again, if you have your phone, you can text the word checks to 64433. We're doing that all through the month of August until our senators come back. But it really is about getting involved and pressuring the Senate to vote on this background checks bill. There are a lot of things that you can do in your state houses too. Amazing things have been done in the state of California thanks to volunteers. Things like passing a red flag law, passing a law that holds police to a higher standard when they shoot to kill, passing a law that makes it harder for Californians to get a gun permit, makes them involved in more training. All of these things matter, and let me tell you why they matter in California. I always say that Florida is the NRA's petri dish. They go in there and they pass really bad laws and then they try to extrapolate them to the rest of the country. California is our petri dish. We can pass strong laws here, show they work, and then extrapolate them to the rest of the country. But it takes all of you showing up and being involved.
There are several questions about the stigma of gun violence and a mistake that, well, the excuse that some use that it's a mental health issue, A, and B, you spoke to it as a public health issue. Could you address both of those?
Sure, absolutely. So the perception that, for example, I think one of the common misperceptions that we hear frequently is that anyone who would commit a mass shooting, they must be mentally ill, because only a mentally ill person would commit a mass shooting. When fewer than 50% of mass shootings are committed by folks who have had any type of diagnosable mental health issue. In fact, what we see is that some people are motivated by hate, right? Some people are clear thinking in their premeditation to harm individuals who they think for some reason don't deserve to live. And what we recognize, particularly around the issue of mental health, is that the vast majority of people with mental health disorders do not commit any violence, okay? And in fact, we're more likely to be victims of violence, right? And so I think it's really important that we dispel some of these misperceptions. And was there another part to the question? There's one.
You did speak to it as a public health.
Oh, as a public health, I mean, this is, one of the most important things is to recognize, number one, how many people, individuals, and families are affected, and that can't just be counted in the number of homicide or suicide deaths, right? That the impact on a child when their parent is a victim of homicide or suicide, right? That ripple effects on family members, on members of the community, on partners, on spouses. All of these things impact our health and our well-being. And from that standpoint, the evidence is clear that gun violence is a public health issue.
Thank you, Dr. One of the issues that we spend a great deal of time on in Congress is women's health in many manifestations, whether it's reproductive freedom, which in our view is not negotiable, and then sexual harassment in the military, the list goes on and on. And really, we have with us this evening one of the champions for protecting women in every aspect of life, Congressman Speer. This question says, can you elaborate about gun violence and domestic violence and beyond that?
There is a correlation between domestic violence, a very clear connection between domestic violence and gun violence. And we see it over and over again. There's also an interesting correlation between misogyny and gun violence. The Las Vegas shooter had been convicted of domestic battery. The Sutherland killer had a domestic violence violation. The gunman in Dayton, I believe, had a rape list. So part of our interest in wanting to promote the research, and there is finally the Dickey Amendment that had for the longest time prevented us from doing research in the National Institute of Health, has now been stricken from the laws in this country. And there is an appropriation of $50 million for research to reinstate that very important part of finding these linkages and how we can deal with it. 1/2 of the mass shootings in the United States have to do with intimate partners or family violence. That's pretty profound. When we started doing these moments of silence in the House, I stopped participating. And in lieu of that, I started to post outside my office all the mass shootings of 3 or more shootings, incidents in my, outside my office. And I was stunned at the number of family murders and then the father committing suicide. So it is a serious problem that we have to address, and we have to look very closely at the misogyny that is linked to it.
Science is so important on all of this, so that we can act with evidence-based proof that what one thing works, one doesn't, and let us proceed down a path of evidence-based decision-making. That would be a new thing, and that's why it's important to have the majority in order to do that. I want to ask this question to you here, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But this question says, my son has been dreaming of going to a Monster Jam show. Surprisingly, I've been trying to avoid going there as I'm worried there might be a mass shooting. What kind of democracy do we live in when the elementary freedom to gather is threatened? Do you share any of that fear in light of what you have been through or what you have seen or heard, especially since the recent tragedy? But you can give it your closing remarks any way you wish.
See, I never spoke on a panel before, so I don't really know how this works. I don't know. Honestly, what's a monster jam show? I don't know what that is, but hey, if he wants to go, let him go. But make sure he's with somebody that he trusts and can get him out of there in case something does happen. Because, Ariana Grande lost how many victims? How many people at her show? And she's still moving, going strong, and nothing has happened then. So if he wants to go, let him go.
Proud of her, is it?
So the one thing that I want to add, I talked a little bit about the stress response and the public health effect, but I also wanted to add that we are the antidote. It is really safe, stable, and nurturing relationships are a buffer to that. And I want to say to you that I hope that your community has wrapped around you and is loving you up so hard right now, because that's where the healing comes from.
Has an engagement in her part of San Francisco in the district, but I just wanted to ask one question from the rest of the agenda of the 200 days. And one of the questions that keeps coming up is, this is all interesting. We can do much more if we have election security. Can you talk about election?
So one of the bills that has passed is a bill by Zoe Lofgren that would put aside $600 million for cities, counties, and states to update their election equipment, and also requires paper ballots. Serving on the Intelligence Committee has given me a bird's eye view of what Russia did. They actually got into the voting records of every state in the country. I spoke to a hacker, one of these white hat hackers that does DEF CON in Las Vegas every year. They bought 10 voting machines on eBay. And over the weekend, they got into every single voting machine. And I said to him, you know, our intelligence community says with high confidence that no votes were changed. And you know what he said to me? There's no way they can say that because they don't leave fingerprints. So it's incumbent on us to make sure that not only everyone votes, but that every vote that is cast is counted appropriately. So that's
Let us thank Congresswoman Spear for her great leadership. I just want to, as we draw to a conclusion, address some of the questions that came up other than what our focus of this evening. And with great gratitude to our guests who are here for the inspiration they are, the vision they show, the knowledge they demonstrate, the direction they give us. Thank you all. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you to AJ. Thank you so much. And I'm going to give them all the last words if they wish. But let me just say, because some of the questions relate to presidential accountability, inspiration, and on the presidential accountability question, I go to two things that Jackie said. She talked about the elections and that the Russian intrusion into our election, and that 100% certitude that the intelligence community has that the Russians did disrupt our elections and that they are doing it again. And that the president has said that's all a hoax. And if in fact they offered me help again, I would accept it, which is really so unethical, so wrong. So to that end, in terms of presidential accountability, I think we all agree that no one is above the law, not even the president of the United States. That we will hold him accountable, and that is what we are doing with our committees. We're doing three things in our work. First, we are legislating to improve the lives of the American people, and I shared some of our priorities with you at the beginning of this meeting. We are legislating. We are getting our job done, honoring our responsibilities to the American people. In addition to that, we are legislate, investigate. We have 6 committees that are investigating the intrusion into our election, and holding the president accountable so that we can litigate. Legislate, investigate, litigate. We are winning in the courts. We are winning in the courts, and we are making our case. So whatever action we do take will be with the strongest possible factual base. And that the American people, whether they agree or not, will respect the path that was taken. And so pay attention to the investigation and the litigation and the path that we are on. In terms of some other issues, like Medicare for All, which is one that came up, that has been on the table for us. We have had hearings in the Rules Committee in April, in the Budget Committee in May, and in the Ways and Means Committee in June. That is on the table for consideration, as are many other ways to improve access to quality, affordable health care for all Americans, including improvements on the Affordable Care Act, which I believe is fundamental to how we go forward. Immigration, I just came back from the Northern Triangle. I went to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to see what the to see how we could mitigate for some of the reasons people have immigrated to the United States, to take the dangerous step that they took to come here, to see how we could improve their situations at home, because most of them have told us if they could stay home, they would like to stay home. But it's too dangerous, it's too threatening, whether it's economically, physically, personally, and in every way. But you know what the administration did in the spring? They cut up all the funding for all the ways that we could help people there. And so we are now fighting back on that and rewriting the rules so that we can, with USAID, with all of the opportunities that we have to help people, to help save the children, Catholic Relief Front, PLAN, I don't know if any of you are part of PLAN, but all of these organizations that help people. When you meet little girls, holding their babies because they were victimized by all of this. It is something that we have to be good neighbors in our hemisphere to help lift up communities, end the violence, give more opportunity, as the doctor said earlier. Economic opportunity makes a big difference in the life of people and how they are not as desperate and looking for other ways. And some have asked about climate. For me, climate was my flagship issue when I was speaker the first time, and it still is. It is an issue that is a generational threat, and it must be addressed. And that the president did not go to the climate meeting at the G7 is not surprising, but nonetheless disappointing. The climate issue, again, it's a public health issue, clean air, clean water, public health. It's a jobs issue, green jobs, and that's why we want to build the infrastructure in a green way with good paying jobs. And by the way, Davis-Bacon, when we build infrastructure to our Pennsylvania, it is a national security issue because the competition for habitat and resources, whether it's water or food and famine and drought and floods and migration, rising sea levels and encroachment of deserts and all the rest, causes conflict in regions. And then it is a moral issue. If you believe, as do I, that this is God's creation and we have a moral responsibility to be good stewards of it. But even if you don't share that religious basis, we all agree that we have a moral responsibility to future generations. Because every time when we talk about pledging the flag, and didn't Callie and Tiffany do a beautiful job, presidents of the student body, when we talk about that, and when we say God bless America, God bless America, what is America? America is our Constitution with our separation of powers to avoid a monarch and the rest, with our Bill of Rights, with all the freedoms contained therein, our Constitution, with this administration dishonors, as I said earlier. It is this beautiful land that God gave us from sea to shining sea and all that and beyond, that they degrade, as I said earlier, and it is who we are as a people, a nation of immigrants. Even Ronald Reagan said, the greatest force for America's preeminence in the world is every new generation of immigrants who comes to our country. And when we fail to recognize that, we will fail to be preeminent in the world. We cannot close the door to that vitality or to that youth. And what are we, but as I said earlier, our values. We have a budget that gave 83% of the benefits to the top 1% in our country. Is that a statement of anybody's values in this room? I don't think so. I do not think so. So in any event, we have a responsibility, again, to honor our founders when they said, the times have found us. they also gave us this guidance. They gave us the guidance of e pluribus unum, from many one. From many one. They couldn't imagine how many we would be, or how different we would be from each other. But they knew that we had to be one. And so as we protect and defend our Constitution, which is our oath of office, our people, our land, our values, we must be doing it in the most unifying way. We are not dividers. We are not like them. We are something different that honors the vows of our founders, the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform, and most of all, the aspirations of our children. It's always about the children. It's always about the future. So thank you, Lincoln High School.